Buongiorno e benvenuti a Librissimi. My name is Happy Testa. I am the founder, artistic director of Librissimi, Toronto Italian Book Festival. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 4th edition of this celebration of Italian-Canadian books, arts, and culture. The events of the past 12 months will leave an indelible mark on the world's consciousness. We have lived through traumas we have barely begun to process. A rolling pandemic whose end is almost in sight, but leaving much sorrow and loss in its wake. And the older and more pervasive suffering we all had to endure as members of our society are still victims of racial discrimination and blatant attacks, as evidenced yet again by the Black Lives Matter movement and recent events. Books and the arts will help us process, understand, and metabolize all this. To this end, this year's festival is taking a closer look at racism and discrimination on both sides of the Atlantic. Later today, we will also take a look at the arts in a post-COVID world, with a panel of prominent Italian-Canadian performers and arts administrators. These are but two of the presentations of Librissimi 2021. This year's program has grown richer than anticipated, and it will take place over the course of 2 days, today and next Saturday, May 15th. Please visit librissimi.ca for the full program and the Zoom links. Also, please note that the books presented this year will be available for purchase through the publishers and through Book City bookstores, as well as tin lids. All the links are on the Librissimi website. Just click on the individual presentation and then you can click on the book covers. Before kicking off our presentation, our feature presentation today, I want to acknowledge Comites Toronto, the Comitato degli Italiani all'Estero, for the unwavering commitment of to the festival. Thank you also to Istituto Italiano di Cultura, key programming partner, and Villa Charities, our community partner, for their continued support. This year, we also kick off a closer collaboration with the Department of Italian Studies at University of Toronto. And I would also like to quickly acknowledge the help of some specific individuals who have made this festival possible. Alessio Letta for the administrative support, Licia Canton, our programming advisor, Paolo Frasca, fan extraordinaire and programming support, Maria Pia Spadafora for creating our new website, Daniela Sansone for the social media support and promotion, and Serenella Sestito, who designed our social media cards. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Michela Di Marco, President of Comites Toronto. Michela, a te.
Buongiorno a tutti, grazie Appi. Sono Michela Di Marco, la Presidente del Comites di Toronto, il Comitato degli Italiani all'Estero per la circoscrizione di Toronto, il Manitoba e i territori nel nord-ovest. Vi do il benvenuto alla 4ª edizione di Librissimi, Toronto Italian Book Festival. Voglio ringraziare innanzitutto te, Happy, per aver reso ancora una volta possibile questo evento quest'anno con una programmazione ricca ed importante e nelle condizioni soprattutto in cui ci troviamo a lavorare negli ultimi mesi. Voglio ringraziare i nostri partner che hanno reso possibile questo evento, ma soprattutto voglio ringraziare gli autori e i partecipanti ai panel perché siete voi l'anima di questo festival. Uno degli obiettivi del Comites di Toronto è promuovere la lingua e la cultura italiane per lo sviluppo e la crescita delle comunità italiane all'estero, nello specifico la nostra comunità qui a Toronto. Il Comites di Toronto sin da subito, con le limitate risorse nel suo piccolo, ha cercato di mantenere fede a questa missione nel tempo. Chi ha seguito Librissimi sin dal primo anno si è reso conto della dedizione, dell'entusiasmo di questo gruppo di volontari, perché questo è quello che siamo, nell'organizzare un evento che possa portare la nostra comunità together, all'incontro, valorizzando appunto i nostri talenti locali, ma non solo, italiani ed internazionali. È nell'incontro, nella cultura e nello scambio, nella diversità che ci evolviamo e cresciamo. Io spero che questo fanciullo, Librissimi, che ha 4 anni, possa prendere il volo nel tempo, e il mio auspicio soprattutto è che ci si possa rincontrare presto nelle forme tradizionali, diciamo, di Librissimi. Grazie a tutti e ad Maiora. Viva Librissimi!
Eccomi, adesso mi sentite? Penso di sì. Va bene, grazie Michela, speriamo che le tue parole si avverino presto. Allora, Toronto's Istituto Italiano di Cultura has a brand new director this year. Well, let me tell you, Dr. Veronica Manson did not miss a beat when I contacted her sometime in March with the idea of showing, against the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter movement, the issue of racism knows no boundaries, and Italy is struggling just as we are here in Canada and have been in the past. She immediately suggested inviting Oiza Queens Day Obasuyi, whose book Corpi, estranei, Foreign Bodies, was recently published in Italy and will be presented shortly. As we say in Italian, se il buongiorno si vede dal mattino, the rest of the day should be very good. Here is Veronica Manson.
Grazie Happy, grazie a tutti, è un piacere partecipare alla 4ª edizione di Librissimi, il Festival del Libro Italiano in Canada, il Festival della letteratura italiana e canadese. Let me proceed in English also for our English-speaking audience. I would like to briefly thank, of course, the comites, the Comitato dell'Italiano all'estero, the Consul General of Italy and the Consul General Eugenio Sgro, the University of Toronto, and in particular, Professor Nicholas Terpstra. He's the chair of the Department of Italian Studies, Villa Charities for their continuous support, and of course, our panelists. And thank you, Happy, for being the artistic director of this beautiful and important book festival. I just wanted to briefly say something that really is came to mind in recent, because of Black Lives Matters and because of what we are witnessing, because we have been witnessing in the past few years. Now, for about 150 years, Italy was an immigration country. The numbers are staggering, and we all know it's part of our history. Between 1880 and 1945, we had 22 million Italians leaving the country and emigrating, going abroad. Now, in our very recent history, we see, and we're talking the past 30 years, 35 years, Italy has become an immigration country for the first time in recent history. And this, of course, had a tremendous impact on our society and has brought up also some, some issues, some subjects that were kind of under the rug. And it's because of Italy is becoming more and more a multi-ethnic society. It is absolutely important to address some subjects that we are doing today. And also because we're not just talking about immigration. At this point, we're having the 2nd generation, the 3rd generation. So we're talking about Italians of foreign descent that are an integral part of our society. We're talking about Italians of different ethnicity. And we may like it or not, this is inevitable. It's a historical process that has happened, I think, a little earlier in different countries, like Europe in general, definitely in the US, definitely in Canada. So only in the past few years, Italy has been dealing with this new Italians, dealing with the fact that we are changing as a society and we have to become multi-ethnic. And it's very important, and that's why I think Librissimi is right on top of this. We are hearing the voices of these new, let's call them new Italians. We're hearing their contribution to our literature, to our culture, to our music, to our customs. And that's why I think there's a very strong parallel between Italy and Canada, I would say also the US, because we are adapting. We have to adapt. We have to change. We have to open our doors, and we have to talk about some difficult issues. We have seen a rise in racism. Why? Because we never were an immigration country. I mean, I grew up, I remember, I grew up in the 60s saying, oh, well, gli italiani non sono razzisti. Il razzismo non esiste in Italia. That's not really true. That's not really true, because history is changing, because we're seeing a society that is transforming very rapidly. The numbers also are quite low. I mean, the latest statistical data says that about 8% of the Italian population is of foreign ethnicity and foreign descent. However, the impact of these new generations, of these new Italians, is very strong, and it's very, very important to hear their voices and to talk about it, to talk about our history, to talk about our colonial past, to talk about different subjects. And what I find very important is it's actually Canada has already been dealing with these issues for a longer period of time, and Italy is at the beginning. And so I think it's wonderful to have today a journalist, a young writer who is very vocal about it, like many others, and who's bringing up to the surface very important subjects that we need to discuss, digest, elaborate, metabolize, so to speak. So I thank very much our speaker of today, Oiza Queens Day Obasuyi. Grazie per essere con noi. Oiza è veramente un punto di riferimento per la comunità afro-italiana, così come tante altre voci che sono i nuovi intellettuali, sono i nuovi italiani, sono i nuovi scrittori, musicisti, intellettuali, professionisti che fanno parte della società italiana contemporanea. I would like to thank, of course, Epi, grazie Epi Testa, for being the artistic director of the Librissimi. I would like to thank Professore Gaoheng Zhang dell'Università di British Columbia, Vancouver, per essere il moderatore anche qui di questo panel che secondo me sarà, come dicevi tu Testa, fondamentale for analyzing the Italian society is changing, and for analyzing also the parallels between Italy and Canada, and what we can learn also from the Canadian experience to become a more like a new society, a more comprehensive, a more harmonious. Grazie, grazie Oiza, e buona presentazione.
Eccomi. Grazie mille Veronica, veramente importante pensare questo fatto di star creando una nuova società, veramente importante, quindi questo è un altro piccolo tassello. Allora, over the past couple of years, Professor Nicholas Terpstra, interim chair of the Department of Italian Studies at the University of Toronto, and I had talked about finding ways to collaborate for Librissimi. This year, he did not hesitate to offer assistance when presented with the idea of helping to secure a moderator for the feature presentation, and with the assistance of Professor Paolo Frasca, paving the way for what we hope will be a rich collaboration. I give you Nicholas Terpstra.
Thank you very much, Happy, and thank you everybody for joining in this this great celebration, the fourth celebration. So congratulations to the organizers of Librissimi for this fourth celebration of Italian books publishing culture. It's a real honor for us. It's a lot of excitement for us to be able to be co-sponsors of this. Really, literature, culture, art, cinema is at the heart of what we do in Italian studies at the University of Toronto. It's what our students and our faculty, what they study. And we think that the key to understanding the full range of human experience, human expression comes through these kinds of cultural expressions. And so to have a chance to share them is really important. It's what we do. It's what we encourage our students and others to do. I'd like to pick up on something that Veronica was mentioning, that you know, the exchanges that are going on now in Italy are profound, and to some extent, yes, they are different and new. But I think Italy also has a long history of welcoming others, and I would give my own experience of that in the sense that my parents immigrated from the Netherlands to Canada, and I decided that that if I was going to study anything in history, I didn't really want to study the Netherlands, but I was interested in studying Italy. And I've always had an extraordinarily warm welcome from Italians. And what I'm doing now in my research, I'm a Renaissance historian. What I'm looking at is the mobility and the migrations of people from across the Mediterranean into Italy in the 16th and 17th centuries. And really, when we scratch the surface, we find that the experience we have now in Italy is actually not necessarily that new, but it goes back centuries and centuries, and it's really shaped Italian culture for quite a while. We were really honored to be able to be part of the conference this year because of the theme related to race and to understanding how Italian society is evolving with more of a recognition of that. And I think in that context too, it's nice to be able to share with you all that this is something that is also going to become part of the curriculum of our department. So the newest faculty member that we've just hired and who will be starting next year, this coming year, is going to be a faculty member who will work specifically on race and cultural studies in a joint appointment with the Center for Diaspora and Transnational Studies. So it'll be race and cultural studies and race and diaspora with a focus on immigration from Africa into Italy and then into Europe. So we very much see this as in a sense, the future direction of Italian studies, the direction that we would like to take as we undergo a generational change in the department. It's and I think that the effort we have here today, the Librissimi this year, simply shows how rich a tradition, how rich a cultural production there already is in this area. So we are extraordinarily honored to be able to be part of this. Next week I'll be able to, we'll have a session, our department will have a session where we'll talk about some of the further initiatives in this area that we are doing through our Frank Iacobucci Center for Italian Canadian Studies. So it's something that is certainly an awareness that's growing in Italy, that's growing in Canada, that's growing globally, and to be part of that discussion as it evolves and really as it takes shape here and onward. Like I say, it's a great honor to us for us to be involved, and we thank you all very much for inviting us, for allowing us to be co-sponsors, and all the very best wishes in the discussions over the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for being a part of this. Working together is something that is extremely important, so it's great to have you. Before I proceed any further to today's feature presentation that we have been talking about, I just want to make sure everybody who is present, we have quite a few people who have joined us, so welcome. It's really great to see you so many and so interested in today's topic. You see that we have Paolo Frasca with us. He's going to help sort of moderate the traffic. He's going to be interacting with our public, our audience through the chat room and helping sort of funnel the questions, because there will be questions afterwards. And so funnel the questions. There's Paolo. Thank you for saying hello. Funnel the questions to our moderator and our presenter. So eccoci quindi giunti alla presentazione di spicco di questo festival, la presentazione di apertura, the presentation of the essay Corpi, Estranei, Foreign Bodies, the first book published by Oiza Queens Day Obasuyi, who is looking at Italy's colonial past and all the way through the all too familiar struggle with systemic racism. And who better to guide that conversation than Professor Gaoheng Zhang? Paolo Frascaisa said is also joining us, but I would like to present now Gaoheng Zhang, who is Assistant Professor of Italian Studies at the University of British Columbia. He will be our moderator today for this presentation. He researches broadly on Italy's global history and connections using a cultural studies approach. His more recent works address migration and mobilities in relation to Italian-Chinese exchanges, the longest standing West-East communication in written record, actually. His first book is titled Migration and the Media, Debating Chinese Migration to Italy in 1992 to 2012, published by University of Toronto Press in 2019. Which is the first detailed media and cultural study of the Chinese migration from both Italian and Chinese migrant perspectives, as well as one of the few book-length analyses of migration and culture. His new book project is tentatively titled Migration and Material Culture, Mobility Between China and Italy, 1980s to 2010s. Under contract with University of Toronto Press, which uses the Chinese concept of clothing, food, residence, mobilities to frame analyses of China migration cultures in Italy and Italian migrants and cultures in China. Without further hesitation, I give you Professor Gaoheng Zhang.
Thank you very much, Happy, for introduction. And I'd like to extend a thank you to all the stakeholders that made this event possible. I'd also like to acknowledge the land on which I'm speaking from. I'm speaking from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. So welcome to this panel, which is going to be about three broad topics. We're going to talk about the Black Lives Matter, especially in its manifestation in the US and in Italy and in Europe. We're also going to tackle the pandemic, and then the anti-Asian racism in Italy and in North America. So as you can see, we're going to treat very recent events from last year, but I hope that with Oiza, we will be able also to talk about the historical legacies and resonances of these various events and their issues. Historical legacies such as the history of Italian colonialism, the history of Italian diasporas, fascism, and even, I would say, the history of Italy as a country, a receiving country of immigrants, because as you know, that Italy really started to receive immigrants in the 1970s, and massive scale immigrants started to arrive in the country in the 1980s. So by now, in the year 2021, there are 40 years, 50 years of receiving immigrants. So I would say Italy, is not quite an up-and-coming country for receiving immigrants. It has had extensive experience. And I would just mention that although it will be Oiza who will explain details and facts and connections from her book, I will also from time to time provide parallel case studies from my own research on Chinese migrants in Italy. Yeah, so that's the brief view of today's panel. I would also like to explain very briefly that people, you're all invited, participants, you're all invited to ask the questions by typing your questions in the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of our Zoom window. You may do so throughout the conversation, which will last for about 45 an hour or so, and then we have about 30 minutes or so for the Q&A session. And yes, now it's my pleasure to introduce our author today. Oiza Queens Day Obasuyi is an Italian woman of Nigerian descent who was born in Ancona in 1995. She is a freelance contributing writer and author who focuses on human rights, migration, and racism. She completed a master's in international relations at the University of Macerata with a thesis that deals with human mobility and human rights with a focus on the Central Mediterranean and Europe's securitarian behavior towards migration. She has written for the Vision, Internazionale and Jacobin Italia. Her articles mainly focus on systemic racism, police brutality, and immigration management in Italy and in Europe, with a focus on the rights of Italians of foreign descent, migrant workers, and asylum seekers. Her first book, which is the one that we're going to talk about today, is titled Corpi, estranei, in which she deconstructs systemic and cultural racism in Italy, the national laws that govern immigration, and the difficulties faced by African migrants and Afro-Italians to acquire their resident permits or citizenship, along with an analysis of everyday racism and the stereotypes that affect specifically Black women and men. So welcome, Oiza, to Canada, at least virtually.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It is a pleasure. I'm so honored, and it's still kind of unbelievable to me that my book actually reached Canada. So it's really, I'm very honored and happy about this. And yeah, of course, as you said, my book deals with the systemic racism in Italy that minorities face every single day. So we are talking about a systemic racism that, it's something that is very evident from the institutional perspective. So something that comes from the laws that we have in Italy, in the immigration management, but also it's a systemic racism that also deals with the cultural heritage that we can call that actually, basically discriminates minorities, a cultural heritage that actually comes from the colonial past of Italy. And yeah, so basically we have these different aspects that I have analyzed in my book, and I focus on many aspects from the, also I talked about the immigration management and how actually, the people of African descent, African migrants face many difficulties in Italy. Every single day we have bad news and very sad news about what happens in the Mediterranean and the behavior of Europe and Italy, in the immigration management. So we see that systemic racism is something that's very evident. And I wanted to show in my book, and this is the most important point to me, that systemic racism doesn't come specifically only from the so-called far-right parties or far-right people or neo-Nazis. It is something that is perpetuated by institutions regardless of their political party, because there are certain laws that have not been basically abolished in Italy that are still discriminating people. So that's what I wanted to show. So this is a book not specifically addressed to racist people, but also to those people who describe themselves as non-racist, but at the same time, they do not realize the kind of system, about the kind of system that they live in, especially white people. So yeah, just to sum up a little bit there.
Yeah, that's a very nice sum up, and I agree very much, because I don't know about in Italian, but in English, often we say anti-racism initiatives, not anti-racist initiatives, perhaps precisely to pinpoint that this is institutional and systemic racism rather than racism, manifested in individuals. Right? Very nice.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think I would just pose some questions to Oiza, which I think from my own reading experience, I think these are some of the highlights from her book. I read her book and I liked it very much, particularly for the clarity that she conveys these facts and arguments and connections for us. So clarity is something that I really appreciate because as a nonfiction writer myself, an academic writing, being clear is the most important principle, and I know how much work that one has to put into that simplicity, that elegance, that clarity. So I very much like that. And I want to ask you also a very generic question regarding the title, Corpi estranei. It's not Corpi stranieri. And I wonder, quali sono stati I tuoi ragionamenti che hanno motivato la tua scelta? No, stranieri, per estranei, estrangement. How come?
Yeah. Ho deciso di chiamarlo Corpi estranei perché proprio in questo libro parlo di soggetti, persone, che non vengono considerate come parte integrante del contesto italiano. Estranei perché appunto vengono sempre silenziati, they don't pass the mic to them, quindi non viene mai passato il microfono a queste persone che esistono in Italia, sia in quanto straniere o comunque italiane di origine straniera, ma che comunque sono soggetti privati della loro voce, privati comunque anche della loro, anzi, mi correggo, la voce ce l'hanno, il problema è però che non vengono ascoltati. Quindi è una persona estranea in un contesto che non la considera, a maggior ragione se quella persona poi parla, si manifesta, si ribella, dice quello che non va, ma allo stesso tempo è un contesto comunque chiuso. Quindi un corpo estraneo perché sono corpi appunto che esistono e che allo stesso tempo però vengono totalmente ignorati. E io tengo chiaramente a sottolineare alla fine del libro che chiaramente non sono soltanto corpi estranei, ma sono persone con una mente pensante, con dei ragionamenti, con dei sentimenti, ma che però appunto non vengono ascoltate, e questo chiaramente fa sempre parte del razzismo sistemico presente in Italia. E di conseguenza per me era importante chiamarlo corpi estranei. Stranieri chiaramente lo spiego nel libro, che si tratta chiaramente di persone di origine straniera e che questo è un punto di discriminazione, ma corpi estranei per questo motivo qua, perché comunque esistono eppure sono comunque degli estranei in casa loro, fondamentalmente non vengono presi in considerazione per questo motivo.
Thank you very much for your explanation, because upon seeing the title, it reminds me some of the theories relating to affects, where they talk about the sense of estrangement by immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers when they are forced, many of them, to live in a different country, and they find it estranged from the environment because it's not their home. Because, for me, estranei also means something, a home, right? So I wonder if I can ask you to expand or elaborate on some points mentioned in the book about home, the sense of belonging to Italy as a nation state, or even to, let's say, Padova as a city of birth for this particular person. So this home, belonging and estrangement, how would you see in relation to any particular case they can think of?
Yeah, I feel like the case of the people who are of foreign descent but were born in Italy do face this kind of issue, we can call it, of feeling at home, because sometimes you're not Italian enough, or you're not even, I don't know, Senegalese enough, Ghanaian enough, or Chinese enough, because of course you were born in Italy and you're basically, you were born here, your entire life is here, you went to school here. At the same time, you have a different, you are from a different ethnicity, your skin color is different, so that people perceive you as being foreign, even if you're not. At the same time, it really depends also on the family, because you might have families that, bring up the children in a different way. They might teach them their culture, or they might teach them to be Italian, to adapt to the Italian context. So it can be really different among the different people. But to my experience, basically, I've never felt like I wasn't at home, meaning that I always felt that I was Italian. It wasn't something that I didn't feel like a foreigner in my own town, which is Ancona, or in Italy, but I feel like I am a foreigner whenever a person doesn't believe that I am Italian. For example, whenever I speak Italian to somebody and that somebody says, "Oh, you speak so well," Like, of course, because I am Italian. So that kind of compliment is not actually a compliment. You're actually saying that you don't perceive me as an Italian because it is too weird for a Black woman to be Italian in Italy. So, but for my own personal experience, I never felt like I was a foreigner. But at the same time, I'm not saying that I reject my Nigerian heritage and culture because I really love it, even though, of course, I cannot, I haven't had an experience because I've never actually been to Nigeria. I hope so one day to visit it. But of course, I feel more Italian because I lived my entire life here. At the same time, my mother, for example, did never, you know, forced me to actually be, you should be support, like, she was never a strict parent, you know, that you're supposed to be a Nigerian because I'm Nigerian. She said, do whatever you want, basically. But at the same time, she was I was always been interested in finding out more about my culture, Nigerian culture. So I think this is the issue, because in Italy, especially if you are of foreign descent, it really depends on the family, but yeah, it is the person that is usually the white Italian person that doesn't make you feel that you are part of Italy because you are too foreign, because your skin color is different, because you come from a different ethnic background. And this is part, of course, of systemic racism, but it is time, according to me, that in the mind of white Italians, there is the fact that Italian can be of different ethnicities nowadays in 2021. So it's time to wake up, basically.
Yeah. It's that sense of meraviglia, right? That
yeah, exactly.
Italians. But I want to, you know, your explanation reminds me of a point that I wanted to ask later on, but I would just ask now because you mentioned it is white Italians that pose, you know, questions such as, oh, you're a compliment, so-called compliment, you're Italian. Yeah. But have you ever, not you, but you know, have you ever heard of encounters whereby, you know, non-white communities living in Italy have the same kind of systemic racism, you know, have the internalized, let's say, white systemic racism? What's your opinion or observation on this issue?
Honestly, in my own experience, I've never encountered such an example, to be honest. No, I think in my own experience, I've never, but probably there might be some sort of internalized racism, meaning that if you are a person that, you know, tries to maybe adapt to a context that you think that will never accept you, because, for example, you can find, I don't know, people of foreign descent that, since they are not considered to be Italian enough, they try to, you know, like wash themselves of their cultural background to look more like an Italian, you know. So maybe the way they speak, the way they dress, and maybe they start hating maybe their own cultural background. I think that is a sort of internalized racism that may happen, unfortunately, because of a context that actually forces you to change, because otherwise, if you don't change, we cannot accept you. So it really reminds me of, and I wrote this in my book as well, of when sometimes there are talk shows in Italy where we talk about the so-called ius soli, and the fact that, you know, in Italy, we have the fact that children who are born here are not considered Italian by the law, and they have to acquire their citizenship only after 18 years old. And basically, during this talk show, they always invite one Black person, and they are like, and the people around that Black person be like, so you speak, I mean, do you eat lasagna at home? So they try to test the fact that this Black person is Italian enough. And if they say yes, then, oh, so you're a good Italian. I mean, but if they say no, maybe I'm a Muslim, or I speak not Italian, but another language at home, they're like, then you're not Italian enough. Non sei abbastanza integrato. You're not enough integrated. So I feel like that internalized racism is something that may come, you know, may grow inside of a person, because of course it is something that it is forced onto that person. So it's very sad at the end of the day, because it's something that can happen, you know, socially speaking, it's something that can happen. It never actually happened to me, but I feel like sometimes you don't feel accepted enough because of the environment.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, it's a dimension that I'm increasingly getting interested in, which is the interethnic perceptions. And I can tell you that from my own research, I often heard from and actually read on Chinese newspapers published in Italy about their, I would say, quasi-racist attitudes, especially towards North Africans, which Chinese migrants living in Italy perceive as somehow, again, criminals, right?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about perception of migrants as criminals. But the Chinese have complained that what they perceive to be North African migrants and refugees have robbed them. Because North African refugees, according to the Chinese, perceive the Chinese as somehow weaker, white Italians at defending themselves, right? So there is certainly the sense of racism being embodied by a foreign migrant.
But you may, I was also thinking about that we have like a few numbers, just basically one senator in Italy who is Black and is with a alt-right party. So that is the example of a person that is so-called the self-made person that, migrated to Italy, but is a person that is of a higher social class. And usually that person, even if they are of a different ethnicity, they are usually the ones that maybe do not quite like the immigrants coming, because they feel like these immigrants are, the people who do not deserve everything, because they're supposed to work for having the welfare, for having access to healthcare or anything. So of course, we have cases of people of higher social class who may be Black, for example, that may have the same kind of basically of behavior of other racist people. But of course, there are people who, as well, to me, it is also an internalized racism, but it is mainly a matter of class, according to me, because when we put class in it, you will understand that class is a major thing, especially when we deal with racism. It's something that is really, intertwined. They are together. And I mean, he's a Black person and he's a senator of an alt-right party in Italy. So it's something that, as you can say, may happen, that you can find other maybe ethnic group that may feel that the last people who arrived are those who do not deserve anything, because I myself gained, what I worked for, and you are just coming. What do you want? I mean, that is the kind of behavior I feel like, and this is sad, of course, because we are supposed to be united against racism.
That's right. I especially like to point on the intersection of race with other categories that makes the case more compelling, the analysis more compelling, I believe. Race, gender, and in this case with class, right? And sometimes in the case of let's say these Chinese migrants' frictions with North Africans, it can also be a fight between two poor marginalized groups, right? These Chinese migrants are not the ones, let's say, who drive a BMW or those things, right? They might be just women walking on the streets and getting robbed, essentially, right? So I wonder whether systemic racism also promotes, right? Contributes to a fight among marginalized communities, vouching for a recognition by the dominant group, right? Who is the better foreign community, right? You know what I mean? So that's a very complex situation. Yeah.
Exactly.
Great.
I completely agree with you.
Grazie. Adesso parliamo un po' dei stereotipi. Allora, nel tuo libro hai riferito alle due immagini stereotipe degli africani nei media mainstream in Italia, ma possiamo anche dire nel mondo occidentale in generale, o criminali o le vittime, i parassiti, i delinquenti. Potresti spiegarci un po' di più?
Sì. Certo, questo perché lo vediamo tutti i giorni nei media. Chiaramente quando una persona, quando vi è un fatto di cronaca in cui la persona è straniera, quella persona viene vista, anzi l'etnia di quella persona viene vista come elemento principale. Quindi se una persona senegalese commette un reato non è colpa solo di quella persona senegalese che ha commesso il reato, ma è colpa di tutti i senegalesi, di tutta la comunità, e tutta la comunità senegalese deve chiedere scusa, cioè è quella comunità che deve chiedere scusa per questa persona che ha commesso un reato. E tante volte questo viene comunque mostrato nei giornali, in cui nel title viene subito messo Senegalese person killed this other person here, maybe an Italian person, e in quel caso lì senegalese viene subito sottolineato, andando comunque a insinuare che i senegalesi siano appunto tutta la comunità che è colpevole di questo reato qui. Quindi in questo caso criminali perché? Perché chiaramente c'è una dicotomia in Italia che si basa sulla criminalizzazione comunque delle persone straniere che ci rubano il lavoro, che commettono più reati, che sono le più cattive, che per natura addirittura, quindi qua abbiamo un altro elemento del razzismo scientifico del passato che comunque ritorna fuori, specialmente quando si tratta purtroppo di stupri nei confronti di donne italiane. Quando c'è la persona magari afrodiscendente che commette quello stupro non si parla di patriarcato, sessismo, che sono cose universali purtroppo, quindi non è che dipende dall'etnia, ma si parla della natura di quell'uomo nero, e anche qua abbiamo un razzismo scientifico che anche negli United States abbiamo on the black man that is basically has tendencies to rape white women. This is a racist concept that it was basically very, that it was analyzed in the past, during colonial past, etc. But it's something that viene fuori anche in Italia. Di conseguenza abbiamo questo elemento qua, una criminalizzazione veramente allucinante, e allo stesso tempo la donna che magari ha subito lo stupro sparisce, cioè si parla soprattutto sull'etnia di quella persona, ma non della donna che ha subito lo stupro, come se tra l'altro alla donna interessasse sapere che la persona è senegalese o italiana, no? In realtà è una questione di supremazia maschile e di violenza maschile sulle donne, e di questo però non si parla. Allo stesso tempo, quindi, oltre a questa criminalizzazione, abbiamo una vittimizzazione. Quindi, se non si parla di criminali, si parla magari di stragi nel Mediterraneo. Ma anche in questo senso, quando parliamo di stragi nel Mediterraneo, anche qua c'è razzismo sistemico a livello proprio di mobilità internazionale, quando si parla delle persone coinvolte che sono state salvate, comunque anche in questo caso notiamo una sorta di spersonalizzazione, sono soltanto numeri, i nomi raramente vengono fuori delle persone che fanno attraversata sul Mediterraneo, o comunque c'è sempre una visione vittimistica comunque della persona, cioè la si vede più che altro come una vittima e non come una persona con dei diritti, no? Che dovrebbe avere diritti e che non dovrebbe mai dover affrontare un viaggio del genere, perché non ha, appunto, viviamo in un contesto in cui ci sono una chiusura totale comunque dei canali legali che non permettono a questa persona di spostarsi in altri modi. Quindi il punto che volevo cercare di sottolineare è che non basta semplicemente comunque vederle come dei poveri cuccioli da salvare, ma come persone soggetti che hanno diritto ad avere diritti fondamentalmente, cosa che comunque noi continuiamo a negare in quanto paesi occidentali, perché con leggi di razzismo sistemico che non togliamo fondamentalmente. E questo è un aspetto fondamentale che comunque rientra nel razzismo sistemico, e è una cosa che, concludo, la possiamo vedere anche per esempio nel modo in cui si rappresenta l'Africa, no? Africa e africani, anche in questo caso, soprattutto magari nei spot pubblicitari che abbiamo dalle ONG, anche in questo caso, benché la cooperazione internazionale sia importantissima, anche questa visione che si ha di Africa e africani in un solo modo, monolitica, unidirezionale, di persone che non si sanno rialzare, povere, anche questo qua contribuisce comunque a una visione molto ancora coloniale, potremmo dire, della persona nera che viene salvata dal white savior, anche in questo caso, no? Una persona nera che non ha spirito di iniziativa, che non ha alcun tipo di mentalità propria, e se non fosse appunto per la persona occidentale bianca che agisce. Quindi abbiamo soltanto due tipi di narrazioni in Italia, quindi o la vittimizzazione o la criminalizzazione. In tutto questo le persone afrodiscendenti sono corpi estranei, di nuovo, perché non è esattamente così, non è così. Anche qui abbiamo due stereotipi completamente diversi e che fanno male comunque sia, no? Che non aiutano a decostruire niente.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for such a rich explanation. I would like to ask maybe a few further questions regarding your explanation. You mentioned the salvation story in relation to Africans being seen as victims and white saviors coming to save the Africans from destroying themselves, let's say.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether you can elaborate a bit more for our audience on this point, particularly in relation to colonial history. And I wonder whether this is only about Italian colonial history or colonial history in general. And maybe you can help us think along those lines.
Yes, I was saying in general, because it's something that it's kind of behavior that you can see from many, I don't know, associations or I don't know, NGOs. That, I mean, I want to be clear about that. It's not that I hate international cooperation or something. It's something that is really useful and it's important, but it is the kind of communication that certain associations do, you know, that can be really, can hurt instead of, you know, improving the condition or improving the kind of information you want to give about African people, or instead of saying African people, I would say the person, the people that are in a specific area of a specific village in a specific country in Africa. Because why I'm being so specific about this, because when we talk about Africa, we're talking about 54 countries. All of them are different. There are so many cities, there are so many places. And this type of generalization is something that it is done every single time. Africa is a country, like everything is just the same. And this is kind of communication that comes from many, I don't know, even coming from many billboards or publicità that you can see on the TV and stuff. So basically, it's something that I think is very Western, you know, where there is this white savior that is portrayed basically as God, as white as God. This is something that also comes from the colonial past. So the West was seen, actually the West seen itself as the only savior of the African countries, also as the colonizer, of course, but the savior, because I'm giving you, you know, civilization. I'm teaching you how to write, how to speak, and you are forced to speak my own language. But from the perspective of the white Western person, that is saving, okay. But in reality, in nowadays, in many countries of Africa, there are so many local associations that, you know, are on the front line of helping, of, you know, even protesting against their own government. So it is not true that without the help of a white savior coming from France or United States or Canada, actually, that person is lost, or an entire country is lost. We are in Nigeria, for example, we have recently had so many protests against the government, against the corruption of the police. So this is an important aspect, you know, concerning the fact that we have so many resilient people that fight against poverty. And so my question is, why is it that even though we have so many examples of, you know, Africans and or people African in a sense of African people that are actually doing what they can do to better their own condition, why we still have this kind of information that is given by certain association that without a white savior, these people are completely lost? It is not true. So, and also what I hate is that there are many also young people that maybe are not racist, maybe they do not realize about what they do, but maybe they take pictures with Black children in small villages, and we don't even know whether they had the consent of their parents. So the privacy concept is something that is valued for white babies in maybe in Italy or in France, but if you go to Ghana, it seems like you can do whatever you want with whatever child you find on the streets, basically, because you take the picture for the Instagram, and then you're good, and then you're good with that. And that is the kind of narration that we have. Basically, there is the white person holding a Black child, and that is Africa. You know, that, I mean, that is wrong, but it is something that needs to be changed, or we perpetuate this colonial kind of mindset, according to me.
Yeah. And I think this reminds me, your last example reminds me of photographs, personal photographs that visitors took with, let's say, a shipwreck, you know, with refugees crossing the Mediterranean in the background. Or, you know, there are artists who have made artworks based on, you know, the Mediterranean crossings of these refugees. And, you know, there is an ethical question involved, right? And how do you relate yourself to essentially a traumatic event for these refugees? And And also it reminds me of the question of positionality, which nowadays we talk a lot within academia, especially in the disciplines of anthropology and psychology. The positionality of the scholar or the academic vis-a-vis their subjects in terms of, how exactly do I have to declare that I am of a certain gender, of a certain class, of a certain race, and how do I then have a certain rapport with my subjects? And because different people perform their identities in front of different people. For example, when I was in India visiting as a, I look obviously like an East Asian person, right? And many Indian people wanted to have a picture with me. And I always found it so bizarre that, that I was almost looked at by them as a kind of exotic appearance animal, right? And sometimes I even had that same sensation when I was in Naples, where everybody would stare at me, walking on the street, let's say. So it's a fascination with the other, but considering the colonial legacy and history and connections, one must question one's subjective positionality vis-a-vis this practice, I would say.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. I want to also ask before I ask any question, I would like to remind the participants to this Zoom event to write your questions in the Q&A box. It would be good that you devise a question rather than simply an observation, okay? Yeah, so I would like to ask a further question coming from your detailed explanation. Yes, I also want. So you mentioned. So you mentioned that perhaps the salvation story is more related to European colonialism in general, in the late 19th century and early 20th century. I wonder what is the specificity of Italian colonialism that is worthwhile talking about? Until very recently, right, people didn't know much about Italian colonial past because of the denial, because of the negation, because of minimization, etc. And, still today, even though this fact is relatively well known outside of Italy, but beginning to be well known in Italy, people sometimes, I am still sometimes posed the question, why is it important to know? I mean, if, this white savior story is, all these colonial officials have practiced, so what's so important to know about the Italian case? Maybe you can elaborate a bit. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. As you mentioned, in Italy, we are in complete denial of what happened in the past, basically, because Italians usually say, Italiani brava gente, noi abbiamo costruito le strade, noi abbiamo fatto questo, abbiamo fatto quest'altro. So obviously, Italians usually pride themselves of, the roads they built, the buildings they built, but the part where basically they use gas to massacre people in North Africa is always, it's always hidden, kind of. They don't tell that kind of story, or maybe nowadays we have so many books actually that deal in history, of history books that deal with Italian colonial past. But when we talk about the colonial past in Italy in the media is always a mess, according to me, because I remember when in Italy there was the case of the statue of Montanelli, which was a Italian journalist, and it's a statue that is actually in Milan. And there have been so many issues regarding that statue, because many groups, anti-racist groups, but also feminist groups, said that statue wasn't supposed to be there, because we are dealing with, yes, a journalist, but a journalist who was also a colonizer that went to North Africa and had a black little girl of 12 years old as a slave. So he bought her basically and used her for his sexual pleasure. And basically, that is somebody, of course, that you would never build a statue for. So why is he there? But the Italian institutions and so many Italian intellectuals and journalists who are obviously white, and maybe they are kind of old. We have this legacy of journalists that are untouchable. And basically, they said that, no, that statue is supposed to be there because he was a great man, etc., etc. So, of course, we have this issue where, you know, it is very hard to talk about the colonial past and also the racism, I would say, of the colonial past, because it was something that it really was about building new roads and finding new opportunities for the poor Italians that basically migrated to North Africa during the fascist period. But again, we are talking about the fascist period where there was a dictator that at some point, of course, collaborated with Hitler and basically, you know, he promulgated the racist laws, not only against the Jews, but also against the Black people who were colonized, you know, in North Africa. So, I mean, it is something that happened. So it is time to face the reality of the fact that no, Italian people wasn't brava gente, so they wasn't good people. They were colonizers, just such as the British, the French, even though there is even this kind of phrase that Italians say that we were never being so, you know, evil, just like the French or the British. No, you were just as evil. And it's time to recognize that. And of course, the fact that we had such a colonial past, we still today, as a Black Italian woman, for example, I brought so many examples from my book of the fact that so many stereotypes that are basically, la parola in inglese. There are so many stereotypes that are in which the Black woman is portrayed. So we have the Black woman who is basically a prostitute. Only the Black woman can only be a prostitute, can only be somebody that is ready to please the white person. And there are so many cases, I have friends of Black women that basically just walk on the road and there are white Italians that perceive them as prostitutes. So this is something that, again, may come from the colonial past, where the Black woman was seen only as the concubine of the white colonizer that was there. And even in the media, even in Italian movies, the Black woman was always portrayed as the one that ruined the white Italian families, you know, the one that basically forced the husband of a white woman to cheat on her. So that is the kind of representation that we have of the Black Italian woman here. And as far as the Black Italian man is concerned, even in the media, the Black person is perceived either as dumb, or in the past in the 70s or 80s or 60s, when were the first Black Italian movies, the Black man was always portrayed as somebody who was dehumanized. He used to talk with B and D's, like Zi Padrone, all these kind of phrases where the Black person was portrayed as a monkey, basically, or as a servant, for example. So we had so many examples of the way that the colonial past is still something that can be still represented in the Italian media. And today we still have the blackface that is done in Italian, you know, TV shows. So it's something that in the United States, I think if that happened today, there will be, I don't know, maybe a protest. But here, the blackface is done. You see Black children watching TV and you have a white person painting themselves Black, interpreting a Black person without any problem. It is not perceived as racism. So that is yeah. I think I went too far, but there's so many things.
We can come back.
Yeah.
But in any case, yeah, I think it's, I think what you're saying, especially with relation to the Italiani brava gente versus the actual atrocities, war atrocities that Italians have inflicted on Libyans, and, you know, being the first nation to use gas chambers essentially on concentration camps and aerial bombing, right? And these historical details have been eliminated from public discussions, and that helped people to have a notion about Italian colonialism as benign colonialism compared to the supposedly more brutal French and British colonialisms. And this reminds me of a pseudo-scientific treatise by Giuseppe Sergi on the Mediterranean race. right? And in the Mediterranean, it's from the early 20th century, and Sergi believes that Italian people belong to the Mediterranean race, which very conveniently also includes East Africans.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is a perfect example of combining self-serving agenda of combining colonial possessions with a people's supposedly ancestral mystical past, right? And that is so that subsequent Italians might argue that we belong to the same race as these East Africans. So what we have as biased, the biased views that we may have towards these East Africans are simply, interracial dynamics, right? Intra-racial dynamics, right? So that they don't perceive racism as such a, serious matter as, the British and the French, whereby they demarcated their race very differently from the Africans. The British and the French, didn't ever claim that they belong to the same race as the African people that they conquered, right? So that's a very, I would say it's this ambiguity and ambivalence in this racial story and this benign colonialism, which I find it fascinating in a way. Yes. Allora, vorrei anche chiederti, potresti spiegarci un po', nella tua spiegazione hai menzionato dei gruppi etnici africani, come per esempio senegalesi, marocchini, eccetera, eccetera, e sappiamo che in Italia si usa il termine marocchino per indicare diversi gruppi africani. Secondo te perché, come facciamo a combattere questo uso molto molto diffuso, no?
Sì, è un problema enorme, anche questo chiaramente fa riferimento sempre alla generalizzazione che si fa, no, della persona straniera, che basta che sia un pochino più scura e allora è africana, e utilizziamo il termine marocchino tra l'altro per generalizzare su tutti gli stati. Anche questo secondo me deriva, come stavo dicendo prima, da una generalizzazione razzista comunque che si fa proprio dell'Africa, presa come un tutt'uno compatto, come se non ci fossero differenze. E soprattutto comunque sia c'è anche questo utilizzo comunque anche dispregiativo, potremmo dire, di marocchino. Chissà poi perché marocchino, non riesco nemmeno anche a spiegarmelo, però l'abbiamo utilizzato come termine generalizzante. E comunque sì, è un problema enorme, sia perché comunque dimostra ancora una volta che c'è una completa, non solo ignoranza a questo punto, ma proprio una resistenza, potremmo dire, a non voler cambiare approccio da questo punto di vista, e questo secondo me deriva proprio dalla mancanza comunque di una decostruzione del razzismo e anche, potremmo dire, del coinvolgimento comunque anche quando si parla di queste cose di persone che arrivano chiaramente di background diversi per decostruire queste cose qua. E di conseguenza c'è proprio una riluttanza, potremmo dire, da questo punto di vista, secondo me purtroppo, di arrivare ad una diversa percezione comunque della persona straniera, che magari ha tra i tratti somatici avere la pelle più scura, ma avere la pelle scura comunque non implica che siamo tutti chiaramente del Marocco, ci sono 54 paesi, come dicevo prima, in Africa, di conseguenza perché dovrei utilizzare un termine del genere? Come fare per combatterlo è difficile, però sicuramente secondo me partire da una riforma dal punto di vista anche scolastico, del modo in cui si parla di geografia, del modo in cui si parla di storia, è fondamentale. Cioè non basta che nei libri di storia della scuola ci sia magari soltanto una piccolissima colonna o 2 righe su che cos'era il colonialismo italiano o su come è fatta la geografia comunque dei paesi africani e delle diverse comunque realtà, perché proprio questa mancanza, questo vuoto fa sì che vengano alimentati comunque gli stereotipi e che si utilizzano comunque termini impropri. Quindi secondo me uno dei modi fondamentali per avere un cambiamento dal punto di vista chiaramente culturale è sicuramente avere maggiore attenzione anche ai libri di testo scolastici, perché secondo me è la base fondamentale, cioè partire proprio da una crescita anche diversa di cittadini e cittadine consapevoli in maniera completamente diversa, con una percezione diversa che si ha comunque di persone di origine straniera, che siano afrodiscendenti o anche di altre origini. Quindi è fondamentale questo punto di vista, quindi partire sicuramente da libri molto più ampi di scuola, dicevo, molto più ampi, molto più precisi anche nella descrizione, che ci sia comunque una spiegazione esaustiva comunque, no? Di questi, sia del fenomeno comunque del colonialismo italiano, del periodo comunque del colonialismo, degli effetti che ha avuto, che anche della geografia, secondo me, del continente africano, perché c'è molta confusione e questo chiaramente crea più stereotipi, sicuramente.
Yes, yeah, I agree very much with you about, you know, educating the population at the level of schools, right? Secondary schools, elementary schools. I remember that one time I attended a talk about the inclusion of Italian women writers in secondary schools curricula. And they found that, you know, apart from Elsa Morante, maybe, you know, there are very few women writers, right? And it's a parallel, I think, case study to, you know, Italy's colonial past and its legacy on today's society. Right? Good. I would also like to ask you a question in the same connection about journalism. Because one thing is to educate the population at school, and another thing is to actually, you know, discipline and hopefully improve the profession of journalism in Italy, perché sappiamo tutti che in Italia i giornali sono motivati ideologicamente, no? I giornalisti in Italia utilizzano allo scopo ideologico le cronache pertinenti ai criminali stranieri, no? Sfruttare le cronache nere per uno scopo piuttosto politico. E nel tuo libro hai parlato anche della Carta di Roma, che è un documento, magari potresti spiegare un po' la Carta di Roma, il suo ruolo nella professione del giornalismo.
Certo, la Carta di Roma comunque è fondamentale perché, spiegando molto brevemente, è un documento fondamentale che dice sostanzialmente il modo più opportuno in cui parlare delle notizie, in cui riferire le notizie. Cioè, per esempio, nella Carta di Roma c'è un esempio, il riferimento al fatto che, per esempio, una persona straniera commette un reato o comunque fa qualcosa di illecito, in quel senso non si vede il senso comunque di sottolineare, potremmo dire, la etnia o la nazionalità di quella persona, se questo elemento chiaramente non è connesso, direttamente connesso all'atto che fa quella persona, non è rilevante sostanzialmente. Se non è rilevante, perché sottolinearlo? Invece purtroppo nel giornalismo italiano, come stavamo chiaramente dicendo prima, tante volte l'etnia o la nazionalità vengono messi in primo piano perché considerati come elemento fondamentale per spiegare una notizia sostanzialmente di cronaca. Di conseguenza vediamo l'associazione tra un crimine commesso e un'intera comunità comunque di persone che fanno parte di una particolare etnia e appunto impiegando la nazionalità e l'etnia fa sì che il lettore, leggendo la notizia, chiaramente sostanzialmente sia convinto che quel crimine sia un qualcosa che viene commesso soltanto dalle persone che fanno parte di una determinata etnia, quindi è come se il crimine sia qualcosa di insito comunque sia nei gruppi etnici. Di conseguenza chiaramente questo tipo di giornalismo è un giornalismo razzista e nocivo che non aiuta comunque sia a chiaramente né a decostruire il razzismo, ma soprattutto non ci allontana comunque da una visione diversa delle persone di origine straniera o straniere comunque in Italia, che vengono di nuovo visti in questo caso, come prima spiegavamo appunto la dicotomia tra vittime o criminali. Il giornalismo in questo caso con questo tipo di notizie contribuisce alla criminalizzazione delle etnie in Italia, perché non c'è un altro modo comunque sia, o meglio c'è, ma non viene adottato un altro modo per parlare di notizie di cronaca che comunque coinvolgono le persone straniere. E volevo dire anche una cosa importante, soprattutto per quanto per esempio riguarda le donne, quando si parla di violenza sulle donne, per esempio le donne straniere vengono, cioè quasi mai se ne parla, cioè nel senso sono notizie che di solito passano in sordina, se ne parla molto meno, quando in realtà anche le donne straniere comunque subiscono violenza come tutte le altre, quindi i loro nomi tante volte spariscono. Pensavo anche al modo in cui per esempio, anche se in un contesto diverso, ma negli Stati Uniti si dice sempre anche say her name, because they say that even black women die from police brutality, but Black women are never mentioned, basically, or rarely mentioned in cases of police brutality. In Italia, quando si parla di violenza sulle le donne straniere, i loro nomi quasi spariscono sempre. Quindi in questo caso anche questo mi fa pensare sempre al modo in cui viene utilizzato il giornalismo e in cui spesso appunto notizie del genere vengono da un lato comunque non se ne parla, dall'altro se ne parla male e soltanto in un modo che criminalizza, come dicevo prima, le etnie, perché la nazionalità e l'etnia viene messo come elemento che ti colpevolizza fondamentalmente, cioè tu non commetti quell'atto, quell'illecito perché comunque cioè voglio dire, il reato commesso viene associato all'etnia di quella persona e non a quella persona. E questo è un errore che comunque vedo tutti i giorni anche io di nuovo su i titoli di giornale che tante volte appunto compaiono. Sì, è vero, purtroppo è vero e bisogna assolutamente cambiare anche questo.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and also this reminds me how a couple of months ago in Atlanta, when that white guy killed and murdered several Asian women, and at first news, at least in English language news, try not to mention the ethnic identity of these victims, and later on, of course, it was a matter of a couple of hours, right? They leaked out that they were Asian women. So in that case, it actually became important, crucial to point to the racial or the ethnic identity of these victims for the Asian American community in order to put the blame more explicitly on racism, right? Rather than how that guy claimed that he was having a bad day or he was addicted to sex or things like that, right? And I would like to ask you a question about the citizenship. So we were talking about how journalists in Italy can be motivated by political factors to depict African refugees and immigrants in certain ways, in certain dichotomous ways, such as victims and criminals. And my question has always been, if more Afro-Italians have the Italian citizenship and are able to vote, and they have a peso politico significativo, then would things be different? Can you tell us a little bit more about the situation surrounding the jus soli, jus sanguinis? Maybe some of our audiences don't know too much about it.
Yeah, basically, in Italy, if you were born by Italian parents, or if you are, if at least one of the two parents is Italian, maybe the one of four and the other is Italian, of course, you acquire the citizenship by jus sanguinis, meaning that your blood basically is Italian. If your blood is Italian, then you are Italian. But if you're born in Italy, and maybe you live your entire life here, but your parents are not Italian, you're not automatically Italian. You have to wait until 18 years old to basically to send a request basically to receive your citizenship. So it is something that is not even automatic. Even when you are 18 years old, you need to ask for it, you need to pay for it. There are so many things that you have to go through, even for your residence permit. Also the fact that you must have like a residence permit for a place you were born in. It's something that is very mind-blowing to me still today, but this is the Italian law. And basically, especially in 2017, there have been many campaigns coming from people who the so-called Italian without citizenship, an association that actually wanted to change this law, which is called Legge 9192, saying that this law not only is kind of ancient and backward, but also it is racist, because there are so many Italian people that say, okay, but maybe you can just wait for until you are 18 years old and then you will get it. But it's not as simple, because not only your parents also, I mean, you have to have a certain reddito, I don't know how to, yeah, exactly. You have to have a certain income.
Yeah.
You have to have a certain.
Sorry, it's a salary, and
Yeah, salary, a sort of salary threshold. I don't know how to call it, or something like that. And it is not automatic that every single person actually lives is rich. We're not everybody is rich, so it is hard for a person who maybe has a low income to actually acquire the citizenship, even if they were born in Italy. And also, children in Italy can still be discriminated, even if they have access to welfare, etc. But they can still be discriminated, because there is a case that I actually wrote on my book where a mayor in Lodi, which is in Lombardy in Italy, actually prohibited children of foreign descent who are basically born in Italy, but they are considered to be foreign, to basically go to the canteen and get access to certain school services that their Italian counterparts, so I'm talking about white Italians in this case, had access to, because those kind of children didn't actually have the had to show certain documents to show that they had access basically to those services, because here we have a different kind of system called ISE, so they have to show that their family income, etc. So their family the family of foreign descent had to basically go to their own country of origin to show that they basically had nothing. They were low income families, so that they could get access to those services, school services. But it is something that is really hard, and it's something that is not asked to Italian families. It is only asked, basically, it was something that was asked only to foreign families. I hope that I had explained this well, but it is kind of difficult to explain. But this is just to show that even if you were born in Italy, even if you are a child, and even if you had to wait until 18 years old, even if you had access to, of course, welfare, but you can still be discriminated. And also, we also have to mention the fact, if one of your parents basically actually loses their job, because you depend on your parents, and your parents depend on the residence permit. With no job, you have no residence permit, and of course, their parents can be repatriated. So paradoxically, their child maybe can be repatriated to a place where they're never seen because they were born in Italy. So these are the many difficulties that children that were born, from foreign parents, but go to school in Italy, live entire life in Italy, may face. So in 2017, so many associations, but even today, but in 2017, there was this important thing that happened, because the so-called EU Soli actually was something that was becoming very important in the political debate. But at some point, even the parties, basically, even the Democratic Party actually basically didn't do much. The entire project of the so-called EU Soli or EU Cultura, which is based on the fact that the children, even if they were born from foreign parents, after 5 years of school, could have basically get access to the citizenship without having to wait until 18 years old. All this entire project basically was completely left out. Basically, the parties didn't do much to go on with this project, and we're still talking about it. It's still in the political debate, but no party actually is willing to finally, create this law that would allow children who were born in Italy, who came to Italy when they were really, really, really young, would allow them to get citizenship. Because without citizenship, of course, obviously you cannot vote, but there are so many difficulties. Let's talk about school. You cannot even go maybe abroad with your classmates, because if you go abroad, that may be a problem in counting the years and the period of residence in Italy. Because if you want to get the citizenship at 18 years old, you have to prove that you have been in Italy for 18 years old, and there is no gap, in that period of time. And it's something that is not asked to the white Italian counterparts or Italians that are Italian by blood, basically. So you see how everything is so racist, and is based on blood, I would say, because if you were born by either one of the two parents are Italian, then you are Italian. If you do not have Italian blood, then you completely face different kind of treatment in Italy. This is the problem. But was this your question, or was there another question that you asked? Because I lost myself explaining it, and I hope I was clear, but it's so difficult.
No, I think it must be clear to our audience. Not so familiar with the Italian situation. And I sort of have a further question, which is essentially about Okay, let me first comment on this, which is to say that Italy, for me, has been focused on migration management rather than providing a pathway to citizenship for children of migrants and first-generation migrants themselves. So they are more focused on how to police the migration flows from elsewhere into Italy, rather than thinking about how to actually address people who want to settle in the country, right? And this is, I think, part of the problem. And therefore, every time there is a flow, you know, there's a crisis, right? And they did a sanatoria to help address that. But they never had a systemized, organized approach to the post-migration phase.
Exactly.
Children face, right? So it's a really sad situation, and I want to go back to my previous point that, you know, Italy has been experiencing this since the 1970s. So, you know, you have to really do something about it, right? It's 40 years later now.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think I want to ask maybe 2 more questions before we go to Q&A. We have about half an hour left. Maybe just 1 more question. And I was listening to one observation earlier, and I was thinking about the concept of nation of immigrants, right? And we talked about Italy's own diasporic past, right? You know, the Italian labor migration was one of the 2 largest ones in the world, together with the Chinese, right? And then we also have this immigrations into Italy, right? So how does that work? How does the experience of Italian labor migration contribute to our understanding of foreign immigration into Italy? What are some of the things that we can draw from?
Okay. Yeah. Of course, the history of Italy is also characterized, you know, by labor migration of Italians going to especially the Americas, North America and South America as well. But I think that nowadays, I mean, even if you try to explain that there are so many people that try to respond to racism by saying, oh, but we've been migrants too. We've been, you know, we had to face so many difficulties. So why are you acting like this? You're acting this way when as Italians, I'm talking about white Italian in this case, have faced discrimination where we first came to the United States, for example. So we're doing the same, we're perpetuating the same kind of behavior towards African migrants in this case. But the problem is that even if you use this type of narration to respond to racism, it doesn't work. Nowadays, it doesn't work because I feel like the entire debate on immigrants also is so polarized in this case that we cannot even, you know, have an healthy debate on that. And the problem is that not only we have systemic racism, but also I think it is something that is really linked also to the type of laws that we have, you know, in Europe and in Italy that are really not based on basically improving, we can say, the entire international mobility framework, because we have a sectarian behavior, you know, that is, of course, European within the European Union, that it actually criminalizes, we can say, migration because of the secretaries on borders, of the behavior of Frontex, for example, towards immigrants. And we do not have, like, we have to liberalize, I can say, and to have more legal ways to travel, because in my opinion, nowadays we live in a sort of, we can say, apartheid of who can migrate, who can go abroad or wherever, because we have very powerful passports, and who basically sees their visa rejected more and more than one time. And the last chance is actually to travel through the Mediterranean without knowing if you will make it or not. So the type of, but at the same time, we have the behavior of Italy and of course, ultimately Europe, that is closing the borders without solving these problems of mobility. So the thing is that it is very interesting to see, because you don't want to solve this problem, which is based on international mobility, but at the same time you say, go back to your country, let's raise walls, and we were never solve these problems, and people still die in the Mediterranean. So it is very interesting to see that, again, Italians once were migrants that, went to the United States, but nowadays they are the same people, basically, that used to discriminate Italians in the United States, but now they became those who discriminate others that come to Italy, because but with a way that actually is, of course, dangerous, and we are not trying to improve the condition. So it is a paradox, basically, because it seems like you don't want to solve this problem, and you want still to maintain this institutional systemic racism without solving problems that will be actually solvable if the states of the European Union actually came together and said, hey, let's do something. Let's, make traveling also easier for people coming from developing countries, because that is the point. We do not have, new ways and legal ways to travel that is not only affordable, but actually accessible for every single person. And of course, the people who suffer the most are those who end up being in detention centers. So Italy has, agreement with Libya and the Libyan Coast Guard that is very, evil, and in the detention centers, and that torture migrants, etc. But, we still live in denial, because Italy says that even if there is this kind of agreement, something that we need to keep, to control these so-called migrant flows. But we are not going to solve the problems by doing this. We are actually complicit, we can say, in the death of the Mediterranean. And it's an approach that, it's very, very unfortunate and sad. And I'm very angry about that, honestly. Yeah, it is.
There's a lot to be angry about. And thank you very much for all of your detailed explanations. And I think we can then proceed to answer some of the questions that people have posed in the Q&A box. And the first question is related to the concept of integration. And it's from Ida Gazili, who asks, how would you say the so-called regular people can support the promotion of a more multicultural and respectful society in Italy?
Yeah, I feel like, now that we have so many more, I would say, initiatives, and unluckily or fortunately, depends on the way you want to see, because of the pandemic, we had to more transfer ourselves on the digital platform. Okay, so many digital initiatives and, many pages were born that discuss about the deconstruction of racism, the deconstruction of the systemic racism that is in this country. So there are so many of these pages that were created also by, second generation Italians, or even foreign people that actually live in Italy. And these are many, for example, many examples, where actually the so-called regular people, even if I do not like this expression, but of course contributes, we can say, to the deconstruction of racism, and to show that we are here, and we have to be accepted, basically. And whereas the concept of integration is something that, even in this case, it depends on the way you see it, because what do we mean when we say integration in the first place? Because it is only a matter of having the documents to have the right to be here, or it is also a matter of you need to, as I was saying before, you need to demonstrate that you're Italian enough and integrated enough by showing central cultural, heritage that you have absorbed from the food to the music, So it really depends on the perspective, but the most important thing here to me is that there are so many, Afro-Italians, but people coming from different backgrounds that nowadays are speaking out, as I say, on social media platform, but not only, because we had so many protests even here in Italy that, protested against the laws and the discriminating laws that we have in Italy, and also for the so-called EU Soli. So I think that the participation of these people and for the causes that they are fighting for, and even in the political or public debate, is very important, actually, in the, let's say, integration, but I would say inclusion, actually, in the Italian society. I hope I have replied to your question.
So we have an observation and a question from Joseph Pivato. He says that in my research, I found that Italy has a long history in the slave trade in the Mediterranean, and it is celebrated in many monuments with Mori statuettes in Venezia, San Marco, tomb of Doge Bersaro, Livorno, monument for Mori, etc. So these images support racial ideas. So you talked about different ethnic groups in Africa. What is the ethnic identity of your family from Nigeria? He knows that many Nigerian writers still deal with the civil war in Biafra in the 1960s.
My family, I mean, he wants to know about my family. I don't know if I understood.
I think he's trying to say that, you know, there are different ethnic groups in Africa, and you know, even in Nigeria, there might be different ethnic groups, and he's asking.
Yes, of course. Yes, there are different ethnic groups in Nigeria, but I feel like it is not, I mean, maybe in the past, it was a matter of, you know, fighting the fight between different kind of ethnic groups. But what I've seen so far, that it is more, it's much more united Nigeria. I'm talking about the youth, especially against the government. It is more like, I feel like, and we're talking about youth that come from different ethnic groups. Okay, you can be Yoruba, you can be Igbo. There are so many. But I see, especially during the NSARS movement that happened recently, I saw like young people coming together against problems concerning inequality, concerning the corruption of the government. So I think that it is more a matter of, nowadays, a matter of the youth against basically the people who uphold power, and basically they only think about themselves instead of fighting against inequality. That still a problem in Nigeria. I don't think that is still a matter of different ethnic groups fighting against each other. Yeah, so.
Wonderful, thank you. And there's another question for you from Antonio Torres Ruiz. So he says, you mentioned class earlier, and he wonders whether in the book there is a longer consideration of class and marginalization of racialized groups, in the sense that race, tra virgolette, serves as a marker based on access to resources and justifying their doing jobs that in other countries in the West, few white Italians are willing to do. Is there a discussion in the book about the links between capitalism and racism in Italy? I guess what he's trying to say is that, you know, immigrants take up a lot of jobs that white Italians no longer want.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, there is not an specific analysis on capitalism, but I do agree with that, because of course, so class is an important aspect. And I wrote about that by dealing with the condition of the immigrants, African immigrants that work in the field in Italy, that are exploited because they do not get access to have the documents, basically, to regularize basically their condition. And the also so-called Bossi-Fini law in Italy that basically forces them to live in a condition of irregularity and exploitment, because without a contract, you need to work basically in an irregular manner to have access to that specific to the documents. Without the contract, you cannot get the documents. Without the documents, you cannot have a contract to work in Italy. And of course, the immigrants that work in Italy, especially in the field, the so-called braccianti, are those that face so many difficulties, not only systemic racism, but of course, even the class struggle, I would say. And I talked about also a person that is Sumaila Sacco, that was an African immigrant that basically worked in the field of the so-called in the southern part of Italy, and he was killed. And even if he actually had the documents, so he was regularized, he still lived in the ghetto. So this is to explain that even if you get the documents, it is not guaranteed that you will get access to a better life or a decent life, okay? So of course, the aspect of social class is crucial, I would say, because racism and class, it's something that is very linked together. Also, Angela Davis has said, of course, talks about women, race and class, but race and class are basically intertwined, they are together. And of course, if you are a person who is an immigrant and has and who is poor as well, will face exploitation more than you know, an regular situation. And of course, in Italy, we do have, I explained that there is a sort of pyramid, I would say, where at the bottom there are immigrants that actually are employed in the low qualified type of jobs. So the immigrant women can only be cleaners, or can only be those who work in the field, or can only be those who basically work with the elders and take care of the elders. But most of these women, for example, are exploited, do not have the correct contracts. And yeah, so basically, of course, there is a problem concerning social class. And of course, the struggle is real, and it deals, and it really affects, I would say, people of foreign descent or foreigners in Italy. So yeah, there is, of course, at least a chapter that is dedicated to that when I talk about immigrants, yeah.
Yeah, and I would also add an anecdote of mine. I always love telling this anecdote to people, and I can't restrain myself from doing it now as well. One day, you know, when I was a graduate student in New York University, and our department has a Casa Italiana, an independent building. And as graduate students, we were able to access the building at night, in the evenings as well. And one evening, I was entering the building with some leftover from a dinner that I had with my friends, and maybe 9 o'clock or so. And there was an Italian artist installing his exhibition in the Casa Italiana. And the first question upon seeing me, the guy asked me, you know, are you here to clean?
Oh my God, that is terrible.
That is a taste of, you know, this, because I was probably not very well dressed, right? Fare bella figura is very important. You know, when I'm well dressed, I'm maybe a Taiwanese, maybe I'm an American, but when I'm not well dressed, then I'm certainly a Chinese.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
this is terrible. Also, because this reminds me of the fact that when you come from a different ethnic background, you either have to be 10 times better, you know, than your counterparts, because it really depends on the way you dress. Exactly, it really depends on the way you dress, because you are perceived in a different, completely different way. If you dress expensive, then you're not either come from Ghana or Nigeria. You come from United States, because then they perceive you to be African American. Because if you're Black and you dress well, then of course you come from the United States. You cannot come from another country. So yeah, it is true. The pressure of always having to look like you are, you know, that you are come from a high income family.
Sure, thank you. And we have a question from Mary Delano. She says that countries like Canada and the United States were built by immigrants, and their governments welcomed them in order to populate and develop their countries. Do you feel that by contrast, Italy was not or is not prepared to accept large numbers of immigrants, and that this influenced their policies or attitudes? And will this evolve over time?
Yeah, I think that, of course, Italy and the United States have a completely different type of history, and we are dealing with, you know, immigration basically now, I would say. But to me also, there is something that played a key role on the perception of immigration, which is also the so-called conspiration theory concerning ethnic substitution. There are so many, I mean, not so many, but there are political alt-right parties that when we dealt with Ius Soli that 2-3 years ago, they were so obsessed with proponing this kind of ethnic substitution conspiracy theory in order to make sure that the Ius Soli wasn't hadn't the opportunity to pass as a law, because they would have perceived that Ius Soli would have created, of course, a multi-ethnic Italy, but at that point, the white people would have disappeared completely from Italy. I think that not only it is not ready, but there is this part, I would say, of maybe political parties that basically still kind of, you know, spread this kind of hate towards and racism towards minorities. At the same time, the problem is that we do not talk anymore, basically, about Ius Soli. It is not in the media. It is not anywhere. So how are we supposed to, you know, be ready and be ready to see a country that is actually changing where we don't even talk about it? I know that nowadays the main problem is the fight against COVID, but the problem is that even with no COVID, you know, the politicians didn't talk about this, or if they did, it was just a matter of few days, and then again we pass into another news. So that is the main problem. We do not talk about it when we have so many actually you know, activists that, you know, push this kind. They are trying to push for this law to be passed, Ius Soli, but we are not heard, basically, and that is the main problem. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And the next question is from Anthony Sargenti. And this is actually a question that I wanted to ask as well. Che ne pensa dell'uso del termine seconde generazioni? Ci sono più vantaggi che svantaggi o viceversa?
Allora, anche questa è una domanda difficile, perché bisogna capire anche chi sono le seconde generazioni, perché magari si arriva anche alla terza tante volte. Quindi diciamo che è un termine generico che è stato adottato per parlare di italiani di diversa origine. Io preferirei comunque di italiani di diversa origine, per esempio, più che seconde generazioni, parlerei più in generale, o comunque italiani di origine straniera, anche per esempio, come terminologie da utilizzare per cercare di inquadrare bene diciamo la situazione. Di certo, cioè, non è problematico, diciamo, seconde generazioni, però allo stesso tempo dipende come viene impiegato, dipende a chi ci riferiamo, secondo me. Non è semplice da questo punto di vista. Per esempio anche all'interno della, chiamarla comunità, anche stavo per dire comunità afro-italiana, ma anche qua è difficile, perché non è come African American Community, che è molto più coesa e molto più diversa negli Stati Uniti o negli Stati Uniti, ma qua in Italia non c'è proprio una comunità, perché ancora siamo tutti un po' sparsi in giro, è più eterogenea la questione. Ecco, per esempio, all'interno di questo dibattito non tutti, per esempio, apprezzano afro-italiano, perché c'è chi dice, ma io però so da dove vengo, non sono come un afroamericano che magari la cui generazione è lì da tantissimo tempo e non si ricorda da dove venivano i suoi antenati in Africa, che potrebbe essere il Ghana, il Senegal, la Nigeria. In Italia invece lo sappiamo, io so che mia madre è nigeriana e che mio papà lo era, perché la migrazione è molto più recente, per esempio, e c'è quindi chi preferisce afrodiscendente italiano. Quindi anche qua ci sono tantissimi modi diversi comunque, no, di esprimersi, oppure italo-ghanese, italo-nigeriano, quindi lì c'è il riferimento, perché ancora è una cosa fresca anche per tutti noi, cioè diciamo che è una questione nuova anche adesso, quindi è difficile sicuramente parlare di terminologie giuste per parlare comunque di questi nuovi concetti, ma bisogna anche creare, vedi, abbiamo anche bisogno di un vocabolario nuovo, potremmo dire, no? Per parlare di queste cose, quindi è un po' complesso, è difficile.
Yeah, and I can add that in academia, this is also a big debate, right? I tend to use second generation migrants when they refer to themselves as such, right? And it might give a bit of a stronger reason to use it, but of course it's very, very ambivalent, I think. And la prossima domanda is from Francesca Lodigo. And she says, how does this racism and discrimination intersect with the history and discourse around the Southern question?
About
the questione meridionale.
Ah, okay. So yeah, even here it is very interesting because of course we know that there is interregional kind of racism between Italians between the North and the South. Especially not only in terms of stereotypes, but also in terms of social economic issues, problems that affect especially the southern parts. The thing is that this is my, experience with that is that when I talk about racism as a Black Italian woman, there is maybe a person coming from the South, an Italian person coming from the South that says, okay, but I face this kind of same discrimination. But is it really the same? I mean, of course, you face discrimination because you are a white person that comes, but a white person that comes from the South. But what if you are Black and you come from the South as well, and you are basically a Black Italian person coming from Naples, for example, okay? So in this case, you face another discrimination, not only because you come from the South, but also because you are Black at the same time. So I feel like we are not, when we talk about racism, it is hard to basically to make the racism that is faced by white Italian coming from the South and racism faced by Black Italians. It is difficult to mix them together, according to me, because still they face different kind of problems. So it is hard for me actually to make a sort of comparison. But of course, at the same time, we can say that the racism that there is in Italy may also be influenced by the kind of interregional kind of conflict that there is between the northern and the southern part, where we talk about, again, racism. But of course, there are different cases. I cannot compare, the life of a Black immigrant that works in the field under the caporale and a white person that comes from the South, but you still have white privilege, for example. Okay, so it is not the same, according to me. It is hard to explain.
Yeah, I would say that the La Questione Meridionale and the racial Southern Italians probably has a much deeper historical roots, because
exactly.
it goes back to the Grand Tour since the 18th, 17th, 18th centuries, whereby Northern European travelers racialized Italians and Italians from below Naples in particular in this respect, whereas the racialized bodies of Blacks and other non-white people, I think, have a lot to do with European colonialism, right? Of course, there was presence of Black people in the Renaissance arts, for example, but the more I think the decisive factor is colonialism, right? So that's a fundamental difference. Of course, there are academic works that argue that the North's takeover of the South during the unification is a semi-colonial process. But then, things become more complicated, right? We might have to think a little bit more about this. A great question and answer. We have a question from Gianna Patriarca. Do you feel that Italy as a country has the ability, the strength, and the courage to engage in the moral, just, and changing attitudes towards all that is wrong in their society? This is a
very hard question. If I look, at the, as I was saying before, especially, after what happened in the United States with the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, you see, many young people that actually now are generally interested, in deconstructing racism. And, this actually had mixed feelings about this, because if on the one hand, I was happy about this, the fact that people were realizing in what kind of country we live in, at the same time, I was like, okay, but without that kind of, homicide, basically, that kind of killing that happened in the United States, would these people have realized about the racism in Italy? So it took that kind of, it took the killing of George Floyd, basically, from that is of the other part of the world, basically, to realize about how, the race issue and racism in Italy. So this actually made me realize that we have so many more things to do, not only the protests that we saw in last summer, but we have so many things to do to deconstruct racism, to protest also against our own government and the discriminating and racist laws that we have. So of course, I do feel like that there are willing people that are willing to change, the country, regardless of their ethnic background. But at the same time, as far as the racism is concerned, I think that there are still so many things to do, because we are literally at the ABC level, as I say here, because maybe, of course, we have systemic, there is systemic racism in the United States, but I feel like the debate is more mature, I feel like, because maybe there are so many African-American scholars, African-American, politicians, and that really can make their voice heard. But here in Italy, we have just started basically. So it is hard to change the entire context. There are people that are people that are willing to change the country, but I think it is really hard. And we need to start to, especially educating people from, as I said before, from school, because that is the main problem, one of the main problems, according to me. Also the social problems concerning, as I said before, the regularization of migrants, the Soli, social justice, but also the cultural and education. It's something that is, according to me, is it lacks, okay, of the deconstruction of racism. It's not something that is, we do not talk about racism that much. It is not something that is discussed in school, okay, in a way that is supposed to be discussed. Maybe when we talk, when there is a discussion of racism in Italy, maybe people end up saying, we are all the same, we're all human beings, and that's it. Okay, but it's not like that. And that is one of the main problems, according to me.
Yeah. Thank you. And we have one last question.
Yeah.
And then we have to finish maybe a couple minutes before my 10 o'clock. This is a question from my student, Alexandra Chipperfield, who has taken various courses with me, including the colonial course. And she's asking, watching Italian commercials and even mainstream shows, she feels as if the issue of the Italian savior is seen within production. We included someone with color skin, and so we're essentially contributing to the elimination of racism. So do you think this practice, this media practice, contributes to the problem and create a greater sense of Italiani brava gente among Italians?
Okay, so I don't think that I understand, meaning that the media, I think so I lost.
Actually, she's saying that, in certain shows, right? I mean, let's say the Netflix Zero, right? Which,
okay, yeah.
Or maybe Zero is not a good example, but certain media shows that included racialized people, and then they think, we have included them, and we're therefore helping to eliminate racism. Okay, so that's their thinking, she says. And do you think this actually creates greater sense of Italiani brava gente?
All right. Well, okay, but the concept of Italiani brava gente is more linked to colonialism, I think, more than this. But the thing is that maybe thinking that adding, people of color, meaning that either Black or of other, ethnic backgrounds, on TV shows, maybe that can be perceived as something that is, of course, progressive, because, I mean, it is, because with Netflix shows, I mean, Black people in this case are represented as normal people, everyday people, not just the stereotype. So sometimes it can be helpful. At the same time, we cannot actually, stop there and think that by adding Black people on TV shows, that will solve the racism issue, okay, in Italy. So, of course, more has to be done than that, obviously. I don't think that it can, fuel the idea of Italiani brava gente, but of course, it's not supposed to be basically an excuse to stop deconstructing about racism. So, of course, it is a good start, but it is not enough. It's not enough.
I agree very much so, yeah. Thank you so much, Oiza. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And now I'm going to invite Happy to conclude.
It's a very tough act to follow. You have brought us an enlightening discussion. Thank you so very much, Dr. Oiza Queens Day Obasuyi. Thank you very much, Professor Gaoheng Zhang. It was an honor to have you. And thank you very much, Professor Paolo Frasca, who's still hiding behind his beautiful C, there he is, for all the assistance. I'm very sorry that we have to end it here. I think there are still 2 or 3 questions, but that's all the time that we have for today. And it was a really great and dynamic conversation and exchange with the public as well. So that was wonderful. I encouraged the audience to join us again at 2 p.m. for the next panel, Arts in Post-COVID Times. And this is it for me for now. Thank you once again, and alla prossima.
Alla prossima, ciao ciao. Grazie.
Ciao, grazie.